If you have said to yourself, I should write that, or if someone has said to you, you should write that, then I'm talking to you because you need to write. And that's why you're tuned in to Why Write. Hi, welcome to Why Write. I am Angela Grout. I'm your host of the show, and I'm very excited that you've tuned in to another episode of Why Write, where I have the privilege to interview different writers about their writing process, and we can talk about why they're writing and what they're writing, and hopefully you will get interest in these authors, but more importantly, I want them to spark you to start writing your story. Whether your story is a memoir or a fictional tale, or maybe it's fantasy, who knows, maybe it's about witches. And if it is, you're going to love this show today. So, let's get inspired today. We're going to talk to an author that has come in from Connecticut. His name is Rande Goodwin. And Rande writes about mystery and magic. And he writes these fantasy novels that are just will transport you into another world, a little time traveling, and definitely inspire you to find out about those worlds. So we're going to talk to him about how he writes those stories and why he's writing those stories. He has a series called The WITCHFINDER'S, SERPENT, The WITCHFINDER'S Sacrifice, and he's also written in anthology books. So he is a prolific writer, and he's definitely done his research on witches. So we're going to talk to him about writing a series, and we're also going to talk to him about how he promotes his books and, all about just websites and writing and witches. So I want to welcome to the show, Rande Goodwin.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hi, Rande. Thank you so much for coming in, traveling in from Connecticut. Not too far. We're here in Massachusetts. We met a couple months ago at a book fair, and, it was really neat. We just started talking, and, you had all these great, behind me, one of your promotional posters, and you had a great setup on your table, so it definitely draws someone over to you, especially when they might be interested in the witches. You've started this series with the Witches of Windsor, and you see your books on the table, and then you see you and you see your lovely wife, and just starting to talk to you guys, and all of a sudden I'm like, I want to have you on the show. Let's talk about this, because this is a kind of a genre that we don't have a lot of authors coming on who are writing, I'm going to use the word fantasy. Yep. I mean, fantasy reality. What got you into writing this fantasy stuff and magic?
Well, I've always been interested in, fantasy, and I've always been a reader. Yep. And the reason I ended up writing this particular book is because it's based on some actual Connecticut history that has to do with the town that I live in. Okay. And the book is really based on the early American witch trials that began actually in Connecticut about 45
You're from
years
Windsor,
Salem.
Connecticut, right?
Yeah,
yep.
Right, Windsor, yep.
So the title of the series, if I am right, The Witches of Windsor. So you're talking about witches from Windsor, or their history. So some of this is, can I use the word truth? I mean,
it's primarily a modern-day fantasy story about a couple of brothers who come to Connecticut to live with their aunt, and they find out that she's a witch, and they end up getting themselves into some trouble. But it's based in part on, like I said, the early American witch trials. The first woman hanged in America as a witch was a woman by the name of Alice Young, and she was from Windsor and hanged in Hartford. And so the story kind of builds on that, and there is a thread that takes place in the 17th century that kind of follows immediately after her hanging.
Yeah, and that's another thing I noticed, you go back centuries.
Yeah.
So to try to write in the moment of being in that century, what kind of research did you have to do for that? Because that's a whole nother part of the writing process.
Yeah. That was that was a journey. That was you write a paragraph and then you think, well, wait a minute, did they have that back then? Yeah,
you could be like, oh, and then she looked at her cell phone. You're like, wait a second, this is 1700s.
No, in one of the books, I have a kid's birthday, and I wanted to make a chocolate cake, and then I thought, well, did they have chocolate back
to
then?
Make. Yeah, you have to do that research.
It turns out they didn't really. Chocolate was just coming into America at that time as like a liquid drink, basically. It was kind of a statusy thing to do in England at the time, but it was just making its way into the colonies, and they didn't have chocolate to put into
that. I mean, that's fascinating because it is so true when you're writing, period pieces. Like you have to keep it authentic to that period.
Right.
And did you have an editor that helped you with that?
I did have an editor. They did help check some facts and things, but I think I was
you
pretty
did that
good about doing.
Well, and some writers can do that on their own. Other people definitely need to depend on the editors to look and say, you know what, cell phones weren't then, tell you things like that.
Editors are amazing. It's definitely a good thing to have an editor.
Do you use the same editor for all your books?
For this 2 series, it was the same editor. It was published by a publisher called Greenleaf, and it was the same person who edited both of them.
Nice.
But it was.
And then, so you build a good rapport with your editor and things. That's good. So I have a question. Of course, I have a question. That's why I have this show. Like when you're writing your book, do you write and send your chapters to the editor as you're writing, or do you send the full manuscript?
The full manuscript, yeah.
Because I've done it kind of sort of both ways, so it's just interesting to see that it can be done, both ways. But when you have the finished manuscript, I think like it helps to ground where the story's going,
right,
so that if they're reading chapter 2 and you're mentioning, Wendy the witch, and you haven't introduced her yet, they can be like, all right, you got to introduce her a little sooner.
Yeah, as I was writing, I kept a list of the characters, their names, and,
Did you have to change any of them?
I didn't, no.
I did that for April Rain. I had my list of characters, and then sometimes I had to change their name. So there'd be times I'd have to, like, go and look at my list to go, who is this again?
Yeah.
Like, it just kind of gets a little confusing even for the writer, especially when we're trying to find the right name for the characters.
Yeah.
Did you create your characters before you started writing? Did those muses come to you, or did they start arriving on the page?
Yeah, I pretty much had them in my mind. I mean, the main characters are a bunch of high school students, right? So you have the the smart kid, you have the cheerleader, and all the classic.
Yeah, it's though. Let me get this right. I think it's the WITCHFINDER'S SERPENT is where one of the kids finds a bracelet, right?
Yes.
And then it kind of attaches to them, and then all of a sudden takes off and does things. Like, where does that inspiration come from? Is it from studying the witches to know that something happens, or do you feel, because this is how I'm going to feel, like as a writer and you take that pen, all of a sudden it just starts going. You can't control it.
Yeah, I mean, serpents, snakes, they kind of, represent evil in a way, and
well, I'm not evil when I'm writing.
Well, in this case, I needed something to kind of like tie the main character into the story and make him kind of accept this new reality.
Yeah.
And so the serpent bracelet it's the Witchfinder Serpent. That's the title of the book. But like you said, he discovers this thing, and it kind of comes alive, wraps itself around his arm, and embeds itself into his skin.
Yeah.
And he can't get it off. And also in the process, he releases a centuries-old witch, basically, who previously owned it and wants it back. Uh-huh. So it kind of sets up the story that way. He's got to deal with that and protect his family and friends in the process,
and accept what he's going through.
Yeah.
No, it's fascinating. So as writers who are watching the show, and as an author myself, one thing that I'll say is, I go to your website. I'm going to transfer a little bit from what the stories are about to how you're promoting your books. And, you have this very, colorful and informational website. Did you design it? Did you get someone to design it? Because having an author platform out there for the world to discover is a big thing.
I got a very brilliant person to design it
you
for
do?
me.
Oh.
My wife.
Oh. Well, I know you're in IT, so I'm thinking, well, you're in IT, but...
No, she did an amazing job.
Yeah.
It's pretty. It's it's colorful.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm very
Rande Goodwin.
.com.
Yeah, definitely check it out. Because, I mean, the way it flows and shows the pictures and then, has... there's different things that every author's site can be a little bit different, but... We also all kind of keep the same format a little bit, where you obviously want to promote your book. You want to tell, a little bit about yourself, and then, having a blog or having your events, like what your events are coming up. Yep. And, to be an author nowadays, I mean, you have to promote yourself.
Yeah.
And, even if you can give someone that card at a show and, they don't buy a book, but they go to the website, you're prompting them and you're, tempting them. That's good with this whole magical stuff. But, let's talk a little bit about how you're doing that. Like, how do you get people to go to your website? How do you draw them there? How do you market your books? Because, this is a genre that has a very specific audience. Mm-hmm. So how do you find them?
It's hard. The promotion is probably harder than writing the book, because you don't really know what you're doing at first, and you just have to try things. But I do like to go to, I've been to Barnes and Noble to do book signings. I've done local craft fairs. Those are really good for, my book is based on local history, so the people locally, have an interest in it, and I have bookmarks and postcards that I print up with information that I hand out and that kind of thing. And
that costs money to do. I mean, it's an investment to sell the investment.
Yeah, but you have to make it known. People have to be able to find it, or they.
So when you're doing book talks or signings at Barnes and Noble, how can you tell the audience a little bit about how you get that? Like, do they just call you up and say, "Hey, Mr. Goodwin, we want you to come in, sign 100 books, and talk about your books"?
That's work too. It's a lot of calling.
Yeah.
Especially if you don't go through one of the main publishers. So I basically, with the help of my wife Beth again, called to all the local Barnes and Nobles, and most of them were very receptive. They like having local authors come in, and it's like an event in their store, so it's kind of like a cool thing.
And I do see they like having local authors, but to do it, you have to do the knocking, you have to do the doorbell ringing, you have to do the phone calls, you have to do the follow-ups, you have to entice them, and let them see your personality and let them see your books so that they know that it will work.
Yeah. And then once you've done one or two, it just becomes so much easier too,
Yeah. So. Do you do book talks on your books?
I've done.
Because I just think it'd be fascinating, especially like how we're talking now, learning about the research that you did, knowing chocolate wasn't around back then, and just like the research that it took to write a fantasy novel. Because I think some people think, oh, we're writing a fantasy novel, we're just gonna sit down and use our imagination, and we're just gonna write, and we do write what we know, but you have to be authentic for the time period that you've picked, which is why I kind of picked modern day times.
I've done a few book talks. I did another podcast a while back. I did a book talk at a library.
Send me the link to that podcast you did, because I can link it to this one too, so people can, kind of watch them all. Although I'm sure you have them all on your website too, because your website designer probably adds all that, or she will.
I think so. If not, I'll make sure it gets added.
When you have that meeting with your website designer, your wife.
Yeah.
So, what does it take to maintain that website?
What does it take to maintain? Just continually, I guess, refreshing.
I thought you were going to say something like, taking your dinners out, telling her how much you love her.
All that too, yeah. No, she's very good about it, but she spends a lot of time updating the upcoming events. Things like that. I haven't come up with that many books, so it's not like
hello, you have books here. You were involved in this anthology where you have a story in there. Was this the first time you were published?
That was the first time,
yeah. And it's always good. I've been published in an anthology and in poetry books, so it's just seeing that first time you're doing it, and it's like, oh yeah, I can do more. When did you start writing?
Very cool. Yeah, it actually was a COVID project. It kind of had nothing.
So you've done both of these books in the last 4 years?
Yeah.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you.
The sitting down, the time, I get it during COVID. I wrote 2 books during COVID. I haven't published them yet. So I get that, but I'm thinking, here you went and got a publisher, and, and let's talk about hardcover.
Oh, yeah.
Why hardcover?
They say actually hardcovers, first of all, they're nicer. Everybody wants to have a hardcover.
Unbelievable. But, I did not do hardcovers because I know it's pricey.
Yeah, believe it or not, there's more profit margin on the hardcovers.
Really?
Because they're cheaper, relatively. What you sell the hardcover for is more than
lucrative.
Yeah, your I guess the amount of money that you get from selling the hardcover is more than the paperback, and it offsets the.
Where did
price.
You get it published?
Greenleaf Book Group, yeah.
And how did you find them?
I found them online. I researched them. They're a hybrid publisher.
Okay, I was just going to ask.
Which you have to be very careful with hybrid publishers because a lot of them are just vanity publishers where they just take anything that a person gives them and charges you a fortune. But Greenleaf in particular is one of the really reputable ones, and they connect you with all the editors and all that kind of stuff.
Do they do the format and the layout in the book, or do you have to do all that?
No, they do that.
Oh, that's really, really nice.
Yeah, they got the cover artist or the cover designer.
And then you have a book jacket, which, I mean, these alone are a couple dollars each, you know. I actually recently took a tour of Bridgeport National Bindery, which is a book making company here, and it was so neat to see, you know, the paper that comes on these big, huge wheels. I might have to put the pictures in with this, but the big, huge wheels, and then they come out, and I mean, it's not cut to size, so they have to cut it, and then watching them add the glue, putting it on, and putting the cover on, and then each jacket cover is hand placed by someone. So I'm just, you know, I was in awe going, okay, as a writer, I know what it takes to make this prose, and it's labor. But then before, you know, when this book goes out to the public, it's already been through like another 12 hands.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Between the editing and the formatting and then doing all that.
Rounds of proofreading and all kinds of,
And for everything you've done for these two, I mean, the fact that you've done them in the last, you know, 4 years, 2 major books, and then promoted them, I mean, that's kudos. High five, man.
Thanks. It's been really like all of our free time. Like this book came out in September, and basically the rest of September, October, and November, and most of December, actually, every weekend we were somewhere promoting it. So yeah, you really got to get out there.
And when you're promoting it, do you have to pay for your tables there, or sometimes do they give them to you? At craft fairs and things like that.
Depends. If it's at a craft fair, usually you have to pay a fee for the table. Yeah. I haven't had any trouble, you know, getting that back. But with things like that, you do have to pay for the table. But I've noticed that the fewer authors that are actually at that event, the better you do.
Yes, I've seen that too. Because when you walk in, like, I know I've been to one where it's just been an author event. So, you know, there's 30 authors. And, you know, for me, I love books. I love talking to authors. I want to read every book out there. But, I mean, to go and buy all 30 books, you know, it's a lot. So you kind of have to pick and choose. When you go to some, you know, craft fairs and there's 2 or 3 authors there, you may only find 1 or 2 books that really interest you because you also want to buy, you know, something that you're going to read. But let's go back to your second book, The Witchfinder's Sacrifice. When did you know this was a series?
Well, actually, these 2 books I wrote at one time, basically, and it was too long of a story, so I ended up breaking it. It just worked out to break nicely in the middle.
That's really nice.
So this one kind of ends a little bit on a cliffhanger, which this one finishes the story.
Yeah, I mean, because they're both about 300 pages, right? I think they're
340, something like that.
Yeah. So, you know, 340 is a good size book for someone to read. You know, 800 pages. I mean, you know, people aren't reading the War and Pieces like they used to do. And that definitely would distract someone, I think, from buying the book and reading it, because it's, you know, it becomes, you know, maybe a door stopper, because you're like, that's a big book. So the fact that, you know, you were able to cut it into 2 and it's, you know, kind of bite-sized pieces is great. Do you think there's a third?
Well, actually, I have this book is going to be coming out this year.
Oh, we can do
this is actually going to be a small anthology that kind of continues the story, and then eventually there'll be at least a third full novel. And I love the characters, and you know, they're fun to do things with, so maybe more.
So when you say anthology, like when I think anthology, sometimes I think, you know, it's a mix of all authors sharing different stories in a book, but this is an anthology of your work.
Well, this is an anthology that is primarily my work. There is one author friend that I had who wrote a story for me, who's going to be in here, but this one's going to be like all full of colored photos. It's going to be, I wanted to do something that was just really pretty and fun to do.
It's gorgeous.
So, yeah, this is kind of just like a...
How'd you do that artwork? Where'd you get that? Listen to me, where'd you get that? How'd you get it? Did someone draw? I mean, I didn't draw it, but is it AI generated?
Controversial, but AI AI, you can really say exactly what you want, and then it just pops out.
I have an episode, I want to say it's in the 20s, with an author who was 7 years old. Mm-hmm. She wrote a book, and she used all AI to generate her pictures. And I mean, it was fascinating talking to her. But one of the things that we discovered, and I'm sure you discovered using that, is, like she would put in, I want a frog sitting on a log. And then, when she looks at it, the frog has, 3 eyes, or it has, three paws, So it's like you really have to pay attention to that, because AI, you can ask it to do something. I literally just tried to do an AI little test thing where I took a short play I wrote, typed in the play to see if it would come up with a story for it. Because I thought, okay, this is, original work, so they can't reach to the internet for stuff. They changed character names. And I was like, yep, nope, AI is not for writing.
Yeah.
So, and I think some people, who are interested in using AI need to be aware that you have to really be an editor and check around that.
Yeah, check what you're generating.
Yeah. All right, so we've talked about, how you've written a series, why you divided, this into 2 books, how you promoted your website and yourself and coming up with your marketing material. But again, I want to talk a little bit more about, why witches?
Well, like I said, I've always been
What's the obsession with witches?
In the topic, one of my first favorite shows was Bewitched.
Oh.
Yeah,
I love that. I do this at red lights. I pretend I'm her.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I used to, after school, go to my grandmother's house and turn on the TV, and Bewitched was on every day. Bewitched and Star Trek; those were my first 2 favorite shows. So that's where I got my interest in that. And then these days, everything is there's so many witchy things now. Like Wicked is huge, and people like witches.
Mm-hmm. Well, even talking about some of the characters in your book and where they, what they have to deal with, reminds me a little bit of like the show Charmed, if you've seen that.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's like they will have to deal with their powers, but they have to deal with the reality of something. So.
Right, yeah. Yep, definitely.
And, Charmed's more, they do the time traveling thing too, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's just neat because I haven't met a man who's been so enamored with witches. And I just think it's really, really cool. And the fact that, you've prolifically written during the pandemic and was able to pick up a pen during the downtime that we all had. I mean, it wasn't really downtime. It was stressful times, I think. But turned it into something good for you. And it's obvious. Did you always know you'd be a writer?
I always wanted to be, but I mean, I'm sure anyone who's listening knows it's so daunting to just consider starting it. But once you start it, it's really not that hard, honestly.
No, I mean, because so many people will, even come up to me and say, "Oh, I want to write a book. How do you do it? Or can you write my book?" And it's like, go ahead, tell them how you write a book. You
sit down and do it. Somebody told me it's like how do you eat an elephant? One bit at a time.
Yeah, one bit at a time. Yeah. No, and you sit down, like whether you want to do, a lot of authors and writers will promote the morning pages. Where you sit down and just write at least 1 page a day. When you're doing something like this, and I don't, you can tell me if you've done this, like have your outline and then you tackle it.
Yeah, you have to have like the overall story so you don't like write yourself into corners.
Yeah.
But just come up with a list of plot points. They're called story beats.
Yep.
And just try to follow that. So yeah.
Yeah, I did that with the book I have. It's not published yet, and had the whole thing. And some days I would just pick a random chapter and just start writing that.
Okay.
I was like, today I'm going to start this one, even though it was out of order. But then when you edit it, it flows. So.
Yeah.
This is fascinating. Thank you so much for coming in today and sharing your passion about witches and how you're writing and your website. And I hope everybody will go visit randegoodwin.com. But can you tell them where they can find these books if they're not locally coming to one of your book signings?
They're pretty much available anywhere you can buy books online, like Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com. If you're in like the Connecticut, Western Mass area, a lot of the Barnes & Nobles actually have them in the store.
Nice.
Yeah.
And on your website?
On my website, there are links. Yep,
okay,
definitely.
Perfect. Thank you again so much. I'm so glad that we've connected and that you were able to come onto the show. And I'm going to, definitely put the link to your site and your books on here. And, I think one day I want to, talk more to your wife, because one of the things we were talking about when I saw you at that book signing is how she has her own little YouTube show, right?
Yeah.
And, she's something about like being an old lady, and she's not an old lady. She's young and beautiful, but she was doing like something with goat yoga, and it was hilarious. So I'm like, I like you. I gotta figure that out. So
old ladies try new things. It's very funny.
Old ladies try new things. Yeah. So that's a good thing, because as we all grow older, we don't want to be old ladies, but as we grow older, we need to know we can try new things. And here, not as a child was writing these stories, but all of a sudden now trying new things and saying I'm publishing books. So congratulations on trying new things.
Thank you.
Thank you again for coming in.
Thanks, appreciate it.
And I want to thank you, my studio audience, for tuning in to another episode of Why Write, and thanks Studio 954 for the opportunity to bring this show to you. I had so much fun today with Rande Goodwin talking about all of these wonderful, magical, and mystery and fantasy life of writing and actually creating it. And for those of you out there who have said, I think I want to write a book, or I have a story, don't let it be a fantasy. Sit in the chair and start writing. And when the show ends today, I want you to set that timer. I say this every show. Set a timer for 10 minutes, or maybe even start committing to waking up in the morning and doing one morning page. It might just be a journalizing page, but you know what? You're writing. You're getting the pen to the page. So after the show today, pick up your pen and, maybe just start thinking about why you want to write a story. Because if you start writing about the fantasy you're having about writing the story, put it on the page, and guess what? That fantasy is already becoming a reality. So let's share today on the page why we want to write a story. All right. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Why Write. Have a great day, and I will see you next episode. Bye.